Hey everyone, welcome back to Silent Husband Club. We're sorry for the long quiet spell. Life got louder than usual. We're working hard to bring you new stories every day. Thank you for sticking with us. The morning they robbed my garage, I thought I'd lost a few tools and a child's bicycle. I was wrong. What I really lost was the story I told myself about my marriage. A camera caught the truth. The truth caught me. If this opening grips you, hit subscribe, tap the like, and leave a comment. It helps the channel grow, and it helps you catch every new episode, right on time. My name is Graham Whitaker, and I can tell you the exact hour my old life ended, 5:10 a.m., the time my alarm insisted I become a man again. That's what the mornings felt like in Blackwater, Pennsylvania, a summons. The little town by the river woke slow, streetlights clinging to the dark as if embarrassed to let go. I slid out of bed with that quiet, guilty care you learn after a decade of marriage, not wanting to wake Eliza. Her side of the room glowed with the blue haze of another late-night crime show looping to nowhere, the volume turned down to a murmur. A cold bowl, a few popcorn hulls, and that faint smell of butter, small artifacts of an ordinary life I thought I understood. I laced my work boots by feel. Construction leaves you with a rhythm, even when your head is noisy. On the way to the kitchen I paused, listening for the settling sounds of our house, the soft whir of the refrigerator, the impatient tick of the hallway clock, the timid breath of our daughters down the hall. Nora, 10, dreams hard and moves the bed when she turns. May, 7, curls so small you wonder if she's trying to hide in her own sleep. If you're a father, you know you listen and you inventory. It's how you make rent on your courage. Coffee hissed and sighed. I poured a travel mug and stepped into the thin, river-cool air. My truck sat in the driveway, paint dull as old pewter, the windshield gathering the first pale of morning. I set my lunch on the passenger seat, started the engine, and let an old true crime podcast fill the cab. The host talked about intentions and alibis, and I remember thinking the word alibi is just a polite way of saying please don't look at me. I should tell you, I didn't think my marriage needed an alibi. We were like most couples in Blackwater, pinched by bills, rescued by routine. We had a plan for Saturday, a cheap one: feed the ducks, walk the path by the river, split a basket of fries at the diner. It's funny, the things you imagine will keep your world together. Ducks. Fries. A park bench with your name carved under the paint. Sunrise came up behind the steel skeleton of a new municipal building, a blush across iron bones. The crew was already there by the time I rolled in, joking about a game, the way men joke when they can't afford to think too hard. I had the first beam in the air when my phone started to buzz in my pocket. I almost let it go. I wish I had. When I fished it out, I saw the name, Walt Carver. Walt is the kind of neighbor that small towns manufacture, a man with a spare ladder and too much time. He's helpful the way a shadow is helpful. It keeps you company, but you never know what it's hiding. Morning, Walt, I said, stepping away from the racket. Graham. His voice had that cautious, testing tone. Hate to bug you before your coffee settles, but your garage is standing wide open. My mouth answered before my brain, no, it's not. I closed it. I always close it. Tools are money, and money is mercy. Could be nothing, he said quickly. Just thought you'd want to know. When he hung up, the hummingbird in my chest didn't. I'm careful about locks. It's the one superstition I allow myself. I told the foreman I had to check on something at home, and I drove back through a town not quite awake, my mind auditioning excuses. Maybe Eliza had grabbed something and forgot the door. Maybe the motor had hiccuped. Maybe the sensor did what sensors do, pretend to be smart until it mattered. I turned onto our street and all the tidy explanations climbed out of the truck and ran. The door yawned, a mouth mid-scream, and the morning light reached all the way to the back wall. Overturned bins, a streak of dropped screws flashing like a spill of silverfish. The concrete looked wrong without the shapes that usually live there. I knew it in my bones before I named it. The drill. The red case with the specialty bits. And the small purple bicycle with the bell May insisted should sound like a bird. The bell didn't sing, it was gone. I stepped inside and glass crunched under my heel. The smell in there wasn't ours: sweat, old oil, the sour trace of a stranger's hurry. I called out to the house without thinking, "Eliza?" The word died against the drywall. The kitchen answered with the ordinary quiet of a room that has decided not to help. Her purse sat on the counter. The keys were in the bowl. Life, arranged like a crime scene only to me. I pulled up the feed from the camera I'd installed over the garage door last winter, after someone had gone down the block testing car handles. The app stuttered, thought it over, and then there I was leaving at 5:10, the door humming down behind me like a curtain. Cars passing. A cat. At 7:12 a.m. shape moved across the frame. Hood up. Hands sure. The figure didn't hesitate. He went straight to the side door, set something metal where the latch meets the frame, and in 3 practice motions the door gave as though it knew him. He vanished into my square of world. He came out with my red case, my drill, the purple bike balanced on the back wheel. He rolled it to the edge of the driveway and lifted it into a pale, tired van that waited just outside the camera's nose. He was tidy about it. I hated that most. When the police came, they brought the right apologies. Sergeant Donnelly took notes in a little notebook stained by other people's misfortune. He was older than the badge needed him to be, with eyes that had learned not to promise. "We'll pull what we can from the video," he said. "These vans, though, it's like trying to tell pigeons apart." He asked me to list what was missing. I did. He asked about the door code for the side entrance. "Only you and your wife," he said. "And the kids?" "Just me and Eliza," I said. "Nora can barely remember her birthday. May thinks the code is a magic word." I smiled when I said it. Donnelly didn't. Eliza called while he was taking pictures of my floor. She sounded freshly awake, voice soft around the edges. "Graham? What's wrong?" "The garage," I said, keeping it even. "Someone broke in. They took some things. May's bike." Silence, the kind that measures. "Do you think it was random?" "I think," I said, watching Donnelly bag the bent lid of a jar, "someone knew what they were doing." I told her not to come home. I told her there was nothing for her to fix. She agreed too quickly, and when we hung up I had the thought you don't say out loud, when someone leaves a room too easily, maybe it's because the room is honest and they are not. The rest of the day moved like wet sand. The photos were taken, the report filed, the good lucks and "we'll be in touches" offered like tissues. When the house finally exhaled its guests, I stood in the garage and tried to put the mess back where it belonged. There's a trick to sorting chaos: you pretend you're building, not undoing. The trick didn't work. Every time I set a wrench back into its tray, my hand remembered how the stranger's hands had moved. Eliza came home after dark. She was careful with her face, the way you carry a full glass. "Long day," she said, placing her bag down as if that were the fragile thing. "We were robbed," I said. That was the long part. I didn't mean it to land like a nail. It did. She asked the right questions. I gave the right answers. We stood in the kitchen as if the tile were a map we were trying not to step off. I wanted her to say, "This scares me." I wanted her to step into the story with me. Instead, she touched my arm and said, "Let's not spiral, okay?" Then she let her hand fall, like she remembered herself. If you've ever tried to sleep while a question chews your name, you understand the night I had. The house was quiet in that strange way that sounds like noise. The fridge became a throat clearing. The clock became a dare. I kept seeing the same 3 frames of the video, the hood, the quick hands, the white rectangle of a license plate just beyond where my camera could read. I thought about Walt's call, how he had sounded like a man who wanted to be on the right side of something. I thought about the side door code and how the intruder never tested the wrong handle, never hesitated, never bluffed at a deadbolt. And because my mind is built for turning wrenches, not mysteries, I went back again and again to the only bolt I trusted, routine. What had changed? Who had known? Morning takes pity eventually. I showered and made lunches with a tenderness that surprised me. Packing a sandwich for your child is like writing a small, private prayer. Turkey, no mustard, Nora had decreed, cut the crusts, May had negotiated like a union rep. When I dropped them at school, Nora headed toward her friends in a way that said she had moved on already. May pressed her palm to mine and whispered, "You'll fix it." I didn't ask how she knew what needed fixing. Children see the headlines before we read them. At the sight, I lifted steel until my arms forgot I was thinking. But thinking is stubborn. During my lunch break I opened the camera app again and watched the video from start to finish, frame by frame, like it might confess something new if I looked long enough. At 7:12, the hooded shape again. At 7 hours 12 minutes and 3 seconds, a tilt of the head toward the side door. At 7 hours 12 minutes and 5 seconds, a hand moves to the keypad, except here's the thing, he doesn't feel around. He doesn't count the buttons like a thief reading Braille. His fingers go where they're wanted. The door gives as if it knows the touch. I locked my phone and stared at the sky until it stopped pretending to be innocent. I'm not a man who jumps to dark conclusions. The dark usually walks to me at its own pace. But in that moment, with the wind dragging grit across the slab and a crane whining its hymn, I felt something I couldn't misname, the first tug of betrayal. A small one, like a snag on your sleeve. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself you'll fix it when you get home. That evening Walt drifted over with the casual drift of a man who practices his casual. We sat on my front steps, the wood warm from a day that had tried to be summer and failed. He talked neighborhood like men talk weather, cameras, motion lights, the economy of fear. Then he looked at me the way a person does when they're about to call your bluff. You ever worry it's not strangers? He asked. Not with you, I mean. Just, in general. I lock my doors, I said, which wasn't an answer. He nodded like I'd proven a point. Eliza around much? He asked, too lightly. I've seen a car I don't recognize sometimes when you're out. Could be a delivery. Could be nothing. He let the nothing sit between us. After he left, I sat there until the step cooled under me. Through the window I could see Eliza moving through the kitchen, her motions neat, careful. She was always careful, especially when she didn't want to break anything. I used to love that about her. That night, I wondered who she was protecting from the break. I didn't do anything heroic before bed. I took out the trash. I turned off the light over the sink. I checked the locks twice, the way a man checks his pulse after he's been scared by a noise only he could hear. Upstairs, the TV hummed another story into the dark. On the nightstand beside Eliza's side of the bed, her phone lay face down. That had become its posture lately. I told myself nothing. I lay down and tried to bargain with sleep. This is how the end of a life begins sometimes, not with a shout, but with the quiet certainty that something important has been moved and no one will admit it. If you ask me when I knew for sure, I'll tell you I didn't. Not then. What I had was a camera, a neighbor with a question, a side door that wanted the wrong hand, and a wife who wouldn't look me in the same sentence for long. That's not proof. That's weather. Still, I could feel a storm deciding. The next morning, I woke at 5:10, as if maybe the clock could save me. I made coffee I didn't drink. I stood in the garage and listened to the air like it might talk back. Then I did the smallest, bravest thing I knew how to do. I opened a new note on my phone and wrote, 7:12 a.m., hands no code. It wasn't much. But it was the first nail in a structure I didn't want to build, a record for the man I'd have to become if the truth kept going where it was going. I didn't know yet about the second video. I didn't know about the pale van's tired plate number, living just outside my camera's reach but well within someone else's. I didn't know that a name from an old headline, Eric Mercer, was drifting back toward Blackwater like a stain rising in water. And I didn't know what Eliza had already promised in whispers I wouldn't hear. I only knew that routine had stopped saving me, and that when routine gives up, a man has to decide what kind of story he's really in. The next days blurred, but the unease only sharpened. Every sound in the house seemed loaded, every silence like a verdict. Eliza moved through the rooms as if rehearsing detachment, her eyes sliding past me in ways I didn't know how to name. She kissed Nora and May at bedtime with a warmth that almost felt borrowed, like she was proving something to herself. I tried to let it go, to fold myself into the grind of the job site, but the truth kept replaying, those hands at the keypad, certain and unhesitating. I'd built a life on blueprints and measurements, and now I stood in a house where the math didn't add up. I told myself it was paranoia, the kind that sneaks in when you're tired, when you feel a little too small in your own skin. But then another detail gnawed at me. The van. My camera had missed a plate, but the shape of it, the color, light, washed out, maybe pale blue, nagged at me like an unfinished chord. And Walt's offhand words, a car I don't recognize when you're out, slid back into place. What was a neighbor really saying when he said that? Was he warning me, or was he gauging whether I was ready to hear the full sentence? One evening, when Eliza told me she needed to stay late at the office, I let her words drift past without a challenge. I sat instead in the garage, my phone cupped in my hands, replaying that same minute from the footage until the pixels swam. My thumb hovered over the screen as if it could coax a clearer image, an answer. I didn't know what I expected, a face revealed, a license plate blinking into legibility, but the only gift the camera offered was consistency. He knew the door. He knew the rhythm of the lock. And maybe, just maybe, he knew me. I couldn't let it rest. That night, after Nora and May were asleep, I called Caleb Ross. We'd gone to high school together, back when Blackwater still had a factory that paid wages you could raise a family on. Caleb had chosen words over steel beams, and now he wrote for the local paper. He had a reputation for sniffing out what others wanted buried. I told him about the break-in, about the van, about the way the intruder seemed too confident with the lock. My voice shook, and I hated that he could hear it. Caleb was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Describe that van again." When I did, he whistled low. "You may not like this, Graham, but I've seen something." An old name from the headlines. Eric Mercer. The name rang like a hammer against rebar. Mercer, the disgraced advisor, the man who'd trained retirements and charities alike, then disappeared after serving just enough time to make a prosecutor look busy. Caleb had covered him once, back when Blackwater had cheered the trial like it was a sport. "Word is," Caleb said, "Mercer's been spotted around again. Driving a pale van. And if he's anywhere near your house, this isn't about tools." I didn't want it. I wanted my life to be about paychecks, ducks at the park, and bedtime stories. But Caleb's voice wouldn't leave my ear. He told me he'd dig, that I should sit tight. Sit tight like a man watching his foundations crack and being told to wait until daylight to patch them. Eliza came home just after that call, her blouse rumpled, her hair not quite hers. She looked at me like she wanted to test whether I'd ask. I didn't. I just watched her set her phone face down on the counter and pour herself a glass of water with hands that trembled ever so slightly. That night, I dreamt of Mercer, not his face, but a shadow moving through my garage, touching every tool like it was a signature, leaving behind an absence that screamed louder than any presence. I woke with sweat cold against my back, and in that half-darkness I heard Eliza shift beside me, her phone lighting up the room for half a second with a message she didn't check. The light vanished, but the question it left behind did not. By morning, the choice I'd been avoiding had already made itself. I was going to find out. Even if it broke me. The following week unfolded like a slow, deliberate tightening of a noose. By day I carried steel beams, my arms aching from honest labor, but my mind gnawed at shadows. By night I sat in the glow of a laptop, scouring every frame of footage again, then plunging into late-night searches that left me staring at the same name Caleb had given me, Eric Mercer. Every article was another nail in a coffin I hadn't known was being built around my family. Fraud, vanished accounts, desperate victims. And then the gap years of nothing, a man supposedly gone to ground. Until now. Until my garage. Eliza seemed to drift further from me each evening. Once she had told me about every irritation at work, every small cruelty her boss threw her way. Now she offered me only silence and tired smiles. I tried to ask, but she parried each question with the same dull blade, "It's just stress, Graham. Let's not make it worse." The truth is, I wanted to believe her. I wanted my wife to be tired, not guilty. But her eyes never lingered, her phone never turned up, and her lips pressed too tightly against a glass of wine she never used to need. One night, after Nora and May were asleep, I set a small camera eye in the corner of the garage, hidden behind the ductwork. I told myself it was about catching Mercer, about protecting the house. But if I'm honest, it was about Eliza. I needed proof of something, anything, even if I couldn't name what. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, my ears tuned to the creaks of the house. I must have dozed, because when I woke the footage was already waiting for me. And what I saw, I will never unsee. At 9:47 p.m., Eliza stepped into the garage. She moved carefully, as though she already knew where the camera wasn't supposed to be. She glanced over her shoulder once, then opened the side door. And then he entered. A man in a hoodie, tall, shoulders stooped in a way I recognized from the first recording. He carried nothing in, but when he left, he carried her secrets on his back. They didn't speak much, not on camera. But their closeness, the way she leaned, the way his hand brushed her arm like it had been there before, that was a confession louder than words. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the phone in my hands, my coffee gone cold. I didn't rage. I didn't even cry. I just stared at the evidence of a life I no longer lived, of a woman who had already left me though she still slept in my house. Betrayal doesn't come like thunder, it comes like rot, slow and patient, until the beam you trusted gives way in your hands. By morning, I had made the hardest call of my life to Patrick Hale, an old friend turned lawyer. He told me to keep everything, every clip, every message, every scrap of proof. His voice was steady, mine was not. When I looked at Nora and May that morning, something hardened in me. They laughed over cereal, milk dribbling down May's chin, Nora correcting her sister with the bossiness of an older child. They didn't know their world had cracked. I swore then that I would not let Eliza's choices take their security, their sense of home. Whatever storm was coming, I would stand between it and them. But the storm wasn't waiting. Later that day, Caleb sent me a message, "Got something." Plate from a traffic cam matches Mercer's van. Walt's place. My stomach dropped as if I'd fallen from a scaffold. The neighbor who had sounded so casual, so concerned, was sheltering the man who had walked through my marriage like it was his own. And Eliza, she was part of it. The questions I'd feared were no longer questions. They were answers I didn't want, written in the ink of betrayal. That night I sat in the dark living room, listening to Eliza's footsteps upstairs, and I knew the time for hoping was over. The truth was coming, and it would not knock. The night I confronted Eliza is burned into me like a scar. I waited until Nora and May were asleep, their little breaths rising and falling in the dark like fragile promises I had to keep. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me, the footage already queued up, the volume muted but the truth screaming all the same. When she came down the stairs, hair damp from the shower, she looked at me with that careful, studied expression of hers, the one that asked, "Which version of you am I meeting tonight?" I didn't give her the chance to guess. I just pressed play. The screen lit her face in ghostly tones. She froze, her eyes flicking between the phone and me, like maybe if she looked hard enough the man in the hoodie would vanish. He didn't. The seconds stretched, and then her shoulders sagged. "Graham," she whispered, but it was less an explanation and more an admission that she had no defense left. "You knew the code," I said quietly. My voice didn't even sound like mine, it was too steady, too flat. "He walked in like he lived here. Because of you." She sat down across from me, and for the first time in years she didn't reach for my hand. She stared at the grain of the table instead, her lips trembling. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she murmured, as if there was a better way for betrayal to introduce itself. "Eric, he was helping me. The debts. I couldn't carry them anymore. I made mistakes, Graham. I thought I could fix them before you ever knew." The words barely made sense. Helping her? With what? I pressed harder, each question another nail in her coffin. And slowly the truth poured out, how she had gotten entangled with Mercer, how he promised her quick money, how she let him use our garage to move things out, to stage the break-in so no one would suspect him. And somewhere in all those transactions, lines blurred. Secrets turned into touches, and touches into something more. My wife had bartered her loyalty, her body, and our family's peace of mind for a man who made a living destroying people. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I sat there while she wept into her hands, whispering apologies that felt like broken glass between us. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't rage that came out, it was resolve. "I will protect Nora and May. You can destroy yourself if you want to, Eliza, but you don't get to take them down with you." She lifted her face, red and wet, searching for a trace of softness in me. There wasn't any left. That night I called Patrick Hale again. He listened in silence while I laid out everything, the footage, her confession, Mercer's name. When I was done, he spoke in the calm, deliberate tone of a man who makes a living out of other men's wreckage. "You have evidence, Graham. That's good. But remember, this isn't just about what she did. It's about securing your daughter's future. Document everything. Keep your anger in check. We'll move step by step." After I hung up, I went to check on the girls. May had twisted herself sideways in bed, her blanket halfway to the floor. I tucked it back around her small body, listening to her murmur in her sleep. Nora stirred when I leaned over, her eyes blinking open just enough to meet mine. "Everything okay, Dad?" she whispered. I swallowed the truth and managed a nod. Everything's going to be okay. But as I sat in the dark, I knew that from here on, every breath, every step I took had to be for them. Because the life I thought I had with Eliza was gone, and the storm had only just broken. The days that followed were a blur of legal steps, whispered conversations, and sleepless nights. Patrick guided me through every move with surgical precision, bank accounts secured, passwords changed, a careful log of every call, every word Eliza spoke in front of the children. I hated the coldness of it, hated how my marriage had turned into a ledger of evidence, but I knew it was the only way to keep Nora and May safe. Eliza, for her part, shifted between pleading apologies and brittle silence. Sometimes she tried to act as if life was still normal, making pancakes or humming while folding laundry, but the performance cracked quickly. The weight of Mercer and her choices dragged behind her like chains she couldn't hide. One evening, as I was putting the girls to bed, the doorbell rang. Standing there was Sergeant Donnelly, the officer who had first taken my report. His face was more serious now, lined with the gravity of a man who had learned something heavy. "Graham," he said quietly, "we've connected your footage with another incident across town. Same van, same man. We're building a case against Mercer, but I need you to be careful. If he feels cornered, he won't play by rules." His words dug deeper than I wanted to admit. Because Mercer wasn't just a shadow anymore, he was a presence, circling closer. That night, after Donnelly left, I looked out across the street at Walt Carver's house. The porch light was on, but the windows were dark. I remembered Caleb's message about Mercer being tied to that address, about the van parked out back. I wanted to march across, pound on that door, and drag the truth into daylight. But then I thought of Nora's hand in mine, of May's soft voice asking if I would fix everything. And I stayed put. Sometimes bravery isn't running into a fight, it's waiting until you have enough armor to win it. Eliza's unraveling came faster than I expected. Her boss called one afternoon, asking if she was okay. She hadn't shown up to work in days. I found her in the bedroom, blinds drawn, a glass of wine sweating on the nightstand though it was barely noon. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered when I tried to talk to her. But her eyes were vacant, chasing a memory I couldn't reach. Later that week, Ruth, her mother, called me in tears. Eliza had been arrested for driving under the influence. I could hear Ruth's shame and sorrow spilling through the line, but I had nothing left to offer. "I can't save her, Ruth," I said, my voice steady but my heart breaking. "I have to save the girls." When the custody hearing came, I stood in that courtroom with Patrick by my side and every ounce of evidence neatly laid out. The footage. The records. The police report. Eliza sat opposite me, smaller than I had ever seen her, her lawyer whispering words that seemed to slip right past her. When the judge granted me primary custody, the relief almost broke me. I had to steady myself, not from triumph, but from the weight of knowing my daughters' lives now rested fully on my shoulders. Nora and May would stay with me. Eliza could see them, but only under conditions that kept them safe. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt both victorious and hollow. The woman I once loved had collapsed into a stranger, and the neighbor I once trusted had harbored a criminal. Mercer was still out there, his shadow looming, though the law was finally closing in. But even as those pieces swirled, my focus narrowed to the two small hands clutching mine as we crossed the street. Their trust was all that mattered, and I would not betray it. Still, in the quiet of my new apartment, when the girls were asleep and the city outside had fallen into its restless hum, I sometimes wondered what would become of Eliza. Would Mercer drag her down until nothing remained? Or would she finally break free, only to find the rest of her life burned down around her? I didn't know. All I knew was that my story wasn't finished, not yet. Starting over is quieter than people think. There's no grand applause, no curtain lifting on a brand new act. It's just me, my daughters, and a two-bedroom apartment with walls that still smell of paint. The furniture is second-hand, the carpet too thin, but it's ours. I chose this place because it's near Nora and May's school. Every morning I walk them there, holding their hands as if they were lifelines, and every afternoon I'm there waiting when the bell rings. That rhythm became my anchor, a routine stitched together out of responsibility and love. At first the girls were restless, missing the old house, their rooms, the backyard. But slowly they began to settle. We filled the empty walls with their drawings, taped crooked rainbows and messy stick figures above the couch until the apartment felt less like a holding cell and more like a home. Our dinners were simple: macaroni, scrambled eggs, sometimes pancakes for supper, but around that small table, we laughed again. It wasn't perfect laughter, not the careless kind we once had, but it was real. And in those moments, I felt the first fragile signs of healing. Eliza's descent became something I heard about secondhand. Ruth called me one evening, her voice breaking as she explained how her daughter had been abandoned by Mercer, left with debts and shame too heavy for her to carry. I listened, I nodded, but I didn't rush in. The man I used to be would have tried to rescue her, to patch the hole she had ripped open herself. But now my strength belonged to two little girls who trusted me to stand firm. I couldn't waste it chasing a woman determined to drown. Mercer's name flickered in the news once more, arrested in a sting, dragged out of some crumbling warehouse on the edge of town. Watching the report, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Just exhaustion. Men like him leave wreckage in every direction, and my family had been part of his debris field. Seeing him in handcuffs didn't fix anything. It just confirmed what I already knew, that evil rarely works alone. It needs help. And Eliza had given it. Life didn't stay empty, though. Through a friend I met June, a woman who carried her own scars with quiet dignity. She didn't rush me, didn't demand anything but honesty. With her, there was no performance, no pretense. She met Nora and me slowly, gently, and to my surprise they welcomed her with the kind of openness children reserve for people who make them feel safe. The first time we all went walking by the river, I caught Nora watching me with a small, knowing smile. Later she whispered, "You look lighter, Dad." And she was right. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, June and I sat on the balcony, watching the town lights flicker across the water. I told her everything about the garage, the camera, the betrayal, the trial. She didn't flinch. She just listened, her hand resting over mine, not to promise me she'd never leave, but to remind me I wasn't alone in this moment. And maybe that was better than promises. Sometimes, when the night is very still, I think back to the man I was before that morning at 5:10 a.m. I was blind, trusting, maybe even naive. But I wasn't weak. I know that now. Because the true measure of strength isn't in pretending betrayal can't break you, it's in rebuilding after it does. My daughters needed that strength, and I found it, piece by jagged piece, even when I thought I had none left. So here I am, not the man I was, not yet the man I want to be, but a father who will not fail. And if life has taught me anything, it's that trust can vanish in an instant, but so can despair. What's left is the choice you make in the middle. And I choose to keep walking forward, hand in hand with Nora and Nay, into whatever comes next.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, shocked you, or simply made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, your thoughts, your story, your truth. Subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable confessions. And if this story made you feel seen, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. You're not alone here. This channel is a safe space for those who've been betrayed, broken, and rebuilt.